Peter Green Mágaibh Tá Ástar an Bhein Seharmadjin, and thank you to the Minister, both the Ministers, Damien English and Sean Kine, in particular, for letting me be their sandwich, the meeting their sandwich. Sean, we'll have heard some of this before, because part of our thinking is around strategy in hinterland, and there are areas in which that's very important for us. MedTech is one we talked about last night, the Minister was there. Today, Marine. So Tá Ástar an Bhein Seo, Tá mé tagtar ascaidí Galway treis bheith imlachí exotic eile le blianta agus Tá Ástar an Bheith Rís I Módscoil Hain agus a gobar in Galway Rís. It was mentioned that we've a kind of an interesting relationship with the sea in Galway, and I think that's true. I was out in Udros, I'll mention this a little later in more detail, a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about the weather was like this, and we were talking about why people weren't out on the sea more here sailing. And one of the colleagues said very reasonably is that people very often in Galway and Connemara see the sea as a place of work rather than a place of leisure. And I think that's particularly true, and it makes it an interesting and potentially more complex relationship very often. And the second thing I think as educators we see with the sea in particular, we see it as a metaphor. In Galway, I'm very conscious that we see the horizon. And as educators, when we see the horizon, we're always conscious that there are things over the horizon that we're curious about. So whether that's somewhere else, as we've often seen, and that was mentioned by the Mayor this morning, but also other people, the idea, the book, the question, the research idea, the research opportunity, the economic opportunity. So very often when you're next to the sea, I think certainly as educators we see that as an opportunity to think about that sense of curiosity that it brings. And certainly as a university we see that as part of our role, is to see ourselves on that edge. And that location is very important for us as having that sense of curiosity in Galway. That's potentially different because of that sense of place and that horizon that we see very often every day. And that's the third piece I'd just like to talk about today is our sense of location and place. Because we're currently having a conversation about our next strategy. The first one is Vision 2020, the current one is Vision 2020, which is rolling out obviously to 2020. Beyond 2020, we may have a title for it already. We're already thinking about some of the ideas within that. And I'm very keen that we think about hinterland and working much more closely as we do currently with our hinterland. And that's really about location, location, location. And one of the reasons for that is hinterlands are very difficult to replicate. So they're an economic and competitive advantage because not everybody has the same hinterland and they can't create it very easily. So it is a distinctive part of what NUI Galway and Galway is the hinterland that we have. And secondly, that sense of location, it means that we can work together very closely in a small number of areas. I've talked about MedTech, as I say, and last night we talked about that. Culture is one I think we can do a lot more on. But the third is the marine and the environment more generally. And I'm very conscious before I even applied to be the president of NUI Galway that there was a lot of good work going on in that space. And we're very keen to work with stakeholders and other constituents in that context. The Marine Institute obviously is a key player in that. Udros is another. We have a research facility in Carna which needs more investment, and we're thinking about the Udros has plans around Portnamara and Kilkieran agus Tommy de Sulva Pléilo Siúd faoi conas mar bheith míad an anóir le chéile an sin. So working with Udros and others in locating particular research infrastructure, if you like, together and working together because I think it's too small a country to compete. And I think we need to work more closely together. And there are three particular areas. I think one of the things that's interesting about NUI Galway is that we don't just have marine, or we're not just in the marine, but I think what we can offer is areas where we can work together across other disciplines. So obviously there's the marine itself, and Ryan Institute led by Charlie Spillane. Some of the work mentioned earlier around pollutants, Alina Vitskarek's work, she's a PhD student, would you believe, in that space, and I know she worked with the Marine Institute and the research vessels here in her work on microplastics, which really gained a lot of notoriety internationally, a lot of publicity internationally, which we were very pleased with. But I think part of it was the sense we had was that this was a really important topic. It wasn't just the work that was done being very rigorous, but that consciousness about pollutants and microplastics. And fish consumption of same, I think, particularly important for us. So there's that piece of work around in the Ryan Institute around the marine and environmental science in particular. I think we're particularly keen to develop. But there are other areas as well, and I just mentioned two. One is in the area of medtech, and again, talking to Udros and others, the Quorum Institute, SFI Institute, led by Abe Pandit, is doing great work on materials in the medtech sector. And again, there are marine materials which can be used in healthcare, which I think, again, we're very keen to explore those kind of opportunities. So when I toured Quorum with Abe and others, they're looking on developing materials which can then be used in various medtech applications, which are sustainable, which don't need as invasive surgery and so on. And I think there's particular scope for the marine materials to be part of that. Seaweed was mentioned, but other sponges and others are potentially there as well. So I think that's an area. I think we have Quorum in Galway, we have the medtech sector, and I think there's that real opportunity to coalesce around medtech and marine in order to make a difference in people's lives. So this is not just about economic impact, but more importantly about impact on life itself, which is, I think, one of the reasons we exist as a university, to make the world a better place than it is. And the third area I'd mention, and I see Stephen Hines is here, is the SEMRU, the Socioeconomic Marine Research Institute, which Stephen is leading. And I think there's that scope as well to work around socioeconomic aspects of the marine, which Stephen leads in already. I know works at the Marine Institute and others, has significant funding in that context. And again, that's an opportunity for us to see the marine as a location, as a socioeconomic context, which is very important for Galway and nationally as well. So in those three areas, location, I think is particularly important for us. And in those three areas, location in the context of marine itself and environmental science, location in the context of medtech and working together and possibly coalescing across those spaces with marine, and location in the context of SEMRU and socioeconomic research in the marine area. They're just three examples of where NUI Galway is working already. And what we're keen to do, particularly as President, we're starting the conversation around how we can do this better. And part of that is having more open walls to people like yourselves. So take it this morning, the reason I wanted to come to speak to you and then go back to my governing authority was because this is important for us as a university, that we will work together with you as stakeholders and other people interested in this area. Take it that we have open walls, porous walls, and part of our strategy will be to work much more closely with you in those areas and others in order to make a difference. And that's where I'd finish, in that what's I think most important about this for us as a university is that impact and making a difference, because we exist as a university to serve society. We graduate students who will serve society, we do research which serves society, and we also contribute to our community locally and nationally and internationally. And part of this is not just about being local, but it's more importantly for us about the international reputation and reach we can create by working together. Our hinterland is distinctive, and our university and that hinterland are determined to work together to make that difference. And therefore, as Aníla's work did with the Marine Institute and ourselves and NUI Galway, the Rhine Institute in particular, made that international impact and difference, which I think then changes policy and makes a difference more widely in the world itself. So Gamil Mahagavarich, Tabroner, Knock Fadel and Phonics, my Udros is waiting for me. I'm sure they'll start without me anyway, but keen to come to speak to you and to continue this conversation, which I hope is the continuation of a conversation which we'll have with you over the coming months and years. Gamil Mahagav agus Guim Gachraher and Ober Exern Dera Shopton. Gamil Mahagav.